Good afternoon. My name is Dustin Dupas, Chief Operating Officer at Tabs Analytics. Welcome to our November webinar, our fourth annual cosmetic study. We'll be reviewing channel and consumer trends in color cosmetics, including eye and face makeup, nail polish and treatments, and lipstick. As a reminder, we make all of our webinars available online within 24 hours at webinars.tabsanalytics.com. Also, this presentation can be made available to you on the call via email. Today's webinar will be the last of our webinars for the 2017 series. We'll start the 2018 webinar series back up in February with our first webinar titled Using Survey Data for Non-Tracked Channels. You can join us for that presentation on Wednesday, February 14th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And again, you can check back at our website at tabsanalytics.com in January for more of the sign-up information. Presenting today is Dr. Kurt Jetta, CEO and founder of Tabs Analytics. At the end of the presentation, we'll open the floor to questions that you could submit via the question box on your GoToWebinar control panel. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Jetta.
Thank you, Dustin, and thank you for all those attending our fourth annual cosmetics study. Just like all our other sector studies that we do in vitamins and grocery and personal care, household products, baby products, we derive most of our information through surveys to 1,000 either adults or in this case women 18 to 75, and we did this just past October, so the data is very recent. As Dustin mentioned, the categories that we're talking about are face, eye, nail, lip, and then gift sets, and it's really the types within those such as mascara and foundation and lipstick, etc. We ask what types of products they purchase and what type of products they purchase regularly. We also then ask where they purchase cosmetics overall and where they purchase those regularly. And again, we're defining regular as 3 or more times per year. One of the things that really distinguishes this cosmetics study versus some of the other sector studies we do is how we get into the attitudes toward the category and then social media specifically. And when we get all this data, we do a lot of internal data validity checks as well as external industry corroboration. So for example, when we see in our survey that Walmart showed a big spike, Walmart.com had a big spike in mentions this survey versus last year, we go to their annual reports and just confirm that they're seeing roughly the same thing on an aggregate basis, which in fact they were. When we talk about internal validities, there's sometimes questions about that. What we're looking for is stability and trend primarily. And also we don't want to have people say they never buy the product and then checking off 5 or 6 different types they actually buy. So those types of checks. It's pretty straightforward, the information that we ask about, but what we get, and this is just inherent to surveys overall, you just get this explosion of information because you can segment the data by demographics and buyer groups and all kinds of interesting things. But you're asking who buys the category, what do they buy, where do they buy, and why do they buy? And then we get into some a little more diagnostic information on what are the year-over-year trends in the behavior and attitude toward these products, towards specific types, etc. As I mentioned, this is the fourth time we've done this, and if you want to see the 3 prior webinars, they can be found at webinars.tabsanalytics.com. We also, I also talk about, and there's in one of those, I think the first one, I talk about the methodology we have called share of mentions, which is a good proxy for share of transactions. So when we quote market share, it will always be in that context. It won't be dollar share, it's not unit share, it's share of actual purchases, which what the data we get in survey correlates very highly with what data you would see in panel data. There's 3 definitions you need to be aware of as we go through this. So what defines a light buyer, medium buyer, heavy buyer? We define that based on the number of types of products that they use. So that we ask about 20 different cosmetic types. If they say they buy at least half of them at least once, then they're considered to be a heavy buyer. And so we really need to be a heavy buyer, you need breadth of purchase. So some maniac out there that's buying 75 different types of lip products or lipstick 75 times a year would still be considered a light buyer because it's only lipstick that they're buying. So it's a function of breadth versus depth of purchase to define a heavy buyer. So let's talk about the breadth and depth of purchase by type. So we go from the left to the right, we're talking about eye care, face care, nail care, lip care, and then gift sets, and then what percent did not buy the category at all. So we can see there was a bit of an uptick this year. Last year was 10% of the women said they didn't buy. This year it's 14%. So that's a meaningful increase in the people not in the category. And then what are the particular segments that grew? Well, we see in foundation among regular buyers, we see some growth there, as well as face powder. We also see artificial nail had a big surge in both from 2017 to 2016 in both any purchase, which is in the blue, and then the regular purchase in the orange. I don't have the specific visibility to what happened in artificial nail, but the fact that that's such a meaningful increase relative to all these other types suggests that that is a real surge. And then lipstick also grew quite a bit, both lipstick and lip gloss. So what declined, if we look at mascara, that's a pretty significant decline in penetration. We also see a meaningful dip in eyeshadow as well as nail polish. We don't really see any declines that are of any note in regular purchasing, which is important. I mean, it's an important way to kind of think about this category. The heavy buyers are getting heavier. So this is talking about the average types purchased. And this is, you can see that there's a big increase. Actually, that's a typo right there. This is among category buyers. So that's this number right here. So among category buyers, it goes 33.5, 3.4, and 3.7. That's a big increase. That's almost a 10% jump in the number of the average number of types being purchased, and we can see where those are going based on what I just circled. So who are these buyers? Who are the heaviest buyers? And just like last year, the heaviest buyers are the youngest buyers. So the women 18 to 24, what we're looking at is what percent of these groups, and we're looking at age, ethnicity, income, and then here's the total. So of the total, 29% of all women are defined as heavy buyers based on buying at least 10 types, but the youngest women, 46% of them are heavy buyers. Here's something that's really interesting. So we get this decline in the 25 to 34, which is last year, you saw there was a big jump. And the increases are really now among this 35 to 54, which for every other category is the strike zone of heavy purchasing, because that's when they start having families. Well, families don't really make that much, aren't that important for cosmetics. So what I surmise is happening is we've been doing this for 4 years now, that some of these women in this group are kind of migrating over. And also we're going to see that social media may have some impact on purchasing behavior as well. Who are the other big buyers? Well, Hispanics, very big target group. That's highly correlated to age, but not entirely. In fact, you see 48% overall, which is somewhat higher than 18 to 24 and much higher than the 25 to 34. So there's something else going on culturally that makes Hispanics, and you can see this real big increase over the last 4 years. And then this is something we've tracked 3 of the past 4 years, is that the peak purchasing really happens in this upper middle income, but not the high income. So you can see that 20, 26, 30, 42, and then 33 and 35. So it peaks right here, and it really has to do with how women define indulgence, and I'll talk more about that when I get to the attitudinal section. So here was the one area, as I mentioned, that declined. So I found that really curious, and actually has some pretty major impact on targeting strategy and just communicating with the consumer. It's still above average, 36 versus 29, but it's not as high as the 35 to 44. And then you see once women hit 55, their broad engagement with the category pretty much not quite disappears, but goes down fairly dramatically. So where are they buying? So rather than breaking out, I mean, one thing to note is it's a highly fragmented category in terms of where they're buying. So within department stores, and I had broken it out last year and it just got kind of cluttered. So if there's follow-up discussions, certainly happy to kind of provide that information. But department stores were the big winner, which was curious. And overall, there's a shift from mass market over into specialty and online, and the opposite happened last year. And if you recall last year, those that were on the call, Walmart was actually a big winner, as well as Target, brick and mortar. So they actually dipped a bit, down one, but they more than made off with it with some pretty significant increases in online. So their net gain was fairly substantial. Specialty beauty seems to have kind of waned a little bit. Ulta and Sephora still growing, Sally Beauty, and then the others are not so much. But it's really this department store that I found the most surprising, and it's really isolated purely on Macy's and Kohl's. So there's a lot of other department stores, JCPenney without the Sephora, Nordstrom, Dillon, Belk, some of these other banners, Lord & Taylor, etc., that all saw actually slight declines. So there's something going on at Macy's and Kohl's that really generated the gain. I mean, could it be the loyalty program? Because I know they both talked about that. It wasn't quite clear from the data on the why, but certainly that's something that's knowable, I would think, with a little bit of investigation. But the big decliner and the real big issue that I see in mass market is the drop in drug, because it's a minus 1.2 off of a smaller base, and it was consistent across all the three big drug chains, Walgreens, CVS, and Rite Aid. So something they're doing is not resonating with the consumer. It's also important to note that just because you have a share decline doesn't mean you have an actual sales decline or even a transaction decline. Our estimate is the overall number of transactions increased, but not quite as much as it did the year before. And the reason being the deceleration is, if you recall, the number of people in the category was somewhat less. But this is the big issue. I mean, what's drug doing? Well, two of the things they're doing is beauty advisors. They're also going after exclusive brand, but that's not really kind of hitting with the consumer, doesn't appear. So now let's look at attitudes and annual trends and attitudes. And I'm going to kind of divide it into, if I had a big line, I should have broken it right here. So here's the first part, is more attitudes, how do they see about indulgence, etc. And then consider the, like beauty advisor and all these others, is what influences their purchase. So let's start from the beginning. So we're looking at, again, the 4 years, 14 through 17. The orange is the heavy buyers, 29% of the total universe, and then the blue are all buyers. First interesting thing you see is this big old decline in the number of people saying that deals are important. That's the first time we've ever seen that, and it seems to be a direct result of the gains you see in other drivers of purchasing, meaning online reviews, etc. But this is really kind of, and this has been something pretty consistent among all the surveys we've done in cosmetics. And so the way that you want to think about these graphs is not only what direction are they going in, but the spread between heavy buyers and all buyers, because that kind of really gets into an understanding of what's driving purchases. So look at the gap between, I like to spend a lot of time in front of the section, and that's how I indulge. So think about now those $75,000 to $100,000 a year women, and how they had the highest purchasing. This is their way of indulging themselves. Rather than expensive cars or vacations or clothing or whatever, they have a very high level of agreeing that cosmetics is how they do that. One other thing that we found is we started asking about how they get influenced by online and the products that they see online. I mean, notice how they all increase among the heavy buyers. Among all buyers, being influenced by reviews and researching actually dipped slightly. There was an increase on some of the others, but the biggest gain was, I try products that I see online reviews or demonstrations for. And that shot way up. Almost half the heavy buyers say that now. And then also, similarly, they learn beauty techniques that they learn from social media. So it's clearly online because the heavy buyers are saying that that's very important. But what about the other buyers? One other thing also I forgot to, before I go on, is I like to limit my purchasing to 1 or 2 favorite brands. Brand loyalty is dying in this category, and it was never that great to begin with, and it's always been a misnomer and a misconception. And look at heavy buyers. At the first time we did it 33%, now it's 19%. And we didn't ask about brands this year, but I mean, one of the things we've seen in the last 3 years is the prior 3 years is just the fact that the number of brands being purchased continues to increase, the types of brands, low end, high end, specialty, mass market. So there just seems to be this insatiable demand by consumers, particularly heavy buyers, for more and different types of brands. Excuse me. So then we broke the same data up just for 2016 and 2017 to light, medium, and heavy. And again, to identify what's important here, first of all, we want to look at the gap between year over year, and this is where I talk about internal validity. The fact that there is so consistent for most of these year over year means that we have a valid approach to collecting the data, but when there's differences, that then gives us some meaningful insight to that. And so let's just take, for example, where the deals, I mean, you see that it's the medium and the heavy where deals take on much less importance. And what's important to them is you can see from the strong, not that much more. I mean, in some of these, trying online is a bigger driver now, or almost as big as deals. And so this is where then a comparative advantage of mass market starts to fall short, because deals was always their domain. Deal buyers, they always drew a disproportionate amount of people that felt that was important. As these factors become more important in the consumer decision process, getting information online, the specialty channels and online will be the primary recipients of that. And that's in fact what we just saw. One thing I always talk about also is beauty advisors. They're just not that important. Even to heavy buyers, you see that it's 27%, and it's only up slightly versus last year. But look at that decline in deal importance. So that is very meaningful for the mass marketers, that they're going to have to find something else in addition. I mean, the deal's still important. I mean, no question, 60% or 49% still saying important. That's half of the buyer base. And it increases somewhat with heavy buying, but it's clearly they need to find other things to influence purchasing. The natural and organics, another aspect that is more important to heavy buyers, but still somewhat niche, although that number at 35 is higher than we see in almost every other sector, I believe. In fact, considerably higher than grocery and personal care, household products. So it does have a role. It just, among the heavy buyers, the specialty channels will benefit disproportionately from that. So I keep talking about social media. So how important really is it, and how should we, understand where it's going in the future? So what we're looking at is annually, we asked 7 different platforms that we'll see on the next page, but if the consumer selected any one of them as saying it was very important to help them make a purchase or decide what products to purchase, they are into this grouping. So you can see how important it is. Just in general, it went from 27, which is somewhat important, but still 3/4 said it's not important, to now it's 40%. The really important jump isn't so much even that the heavy buyers keep growing, and now that's a really high number. So 60% of the heavy buyers are saying that social media is very important. So they are 29% of the buyers, remember, and we estimate they're between 60 and 65% of all the transactions, and probably more than that on to dollars. This is the number, the jump that's really kind of jumped out at us, is when we talk about medium buyer. So that is our first indication that this type of method of gaining information is becoming mainstream. It's not just niche for young millennials. And so if we tied this back to then that information we saw toward the beginning on the women 35 to 54 starting to become heavier buyers, well, I think those two there's correlation certainly, but I think it's probably cause and effect. They are more likely to get their information on social media, and that in turn makes them heavier buyers. And if we look at the specific platform, now YouTube has stood out and has for the last couple of years among heavy buyers. You see almost every person that said it's important said YouTube was important, and that jumped. Every platform grew year to year among the total, as well as the heavy buyers. In fact, medium buyers, there was a 50% increase in the average number of platforms that they said were important. This interesting thing among this is that, besides the fact that everything's growing, is that beauty blogs, when we first did this in 2014, were neck and neck with YouTube as the most important platform. That's kind of sputtered now. So it's clear that consumers would rather see the products versus read about them. And so in YouTube, they can actually see them, and recall in one of the questions we asked, they like to see them demonstrated, and they like to see getting beauty tips. So that, the beauty blogs as relative importance seems to be waning a bit unless they can start embedding some more visual and video content in there, which I think many of them are. That's the way they'll stay relevant. So what have we learned then from cosmetics? Well, it continues to see growth, but it's decelerating a bit, and particularly in mass market, it's really a function of the fact that there were a meaningful number of more percentage women that were not in the category at all. Dollar growth is still very robust, driven primarily by a shift toward more expensive brands that we find in specialty and online. And it really was the big gains in department stores that was most notable and most surprising. Those gains were limited to Macy's and Kohl's, so it appears they may be doing something differently than other stores. Online growth was significant, particularly for Walmart and Target. And in fact, we see them outpacing Amazon in every sector we've looked at, except for grocery. And the big thing with grocery was we did our study pretty soon after the Whole Foods Amazon merger was announced, so I'm wondering if there was a little ghosting there. But I mean, Walmart, there is a case that could be made that in the CPG universe, Walmart, not Amazon, will be number one. But everything that I'm seeing says these three are going to be pretty meaningful players. Now they just have to figure out how to make some money, because that's far from clear that any of them have figured that out. As far as the cosmetic strategy for drugs, which is beauty advisors, exclusive brands, and I guess loyalty programs as well, it's not working. Whatever they're doing, they need to change it because they lost a significant amount of share. And I would argue that we could have a conversation on whether this should be a strategically important category for them to begin with. That's not to say they should reduce, but I read fairly regularly that they're looking to expand. And I mean, it's a very expensive category to maintain. I mean, particularly with price points high and inventory investment high and turns pretty low. And it's just not, what any objective observer would consider a good demographic fit. Cosmetics, even, now that it's skewing a bit older, it's still clearly the skew is below 55, whereas the skew toward drug is above 55. So, that really would need to be reconciled from drug chains. But, I'm sure they'll keep chugging on. They keep, they get it in their heads to do it, and they're going to do it. So that doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. And then deals still very important, but they declined significantly versus last year. And who does that impact most? Well, it impacts the mass market guys and particularly the drug chains. So that also would be something I would consider to be cause and effect. I mean, in fact, that's probably one additional thing. Is the fact they just promote a lot. And that's not going to be enough to hold their share. They need to figure out a little bit something different if they want to keep holding share. And those information platforms, how consumers get information on products is becoming more and more important in their decision hierarchy, particularly for those heavy buyers. But as we saw, it's becoming more mainstream. Medium buyers also doing a lot of searching on social media. And that's really the big story of this category. I mean, we talk about how You know, we want to be all aspiring futurists and see how the millennials are transforming our categories. I mean, this is something I said last year, and I'll say it again. This is a category, it's a bellwether to understanding the millennial and just how categories transform when millennials and social media have a very big impact, and which they clearly do here, and there's no signs that that importance is abating. So any brand with aspirations to be a significant player, regardless of outlet, you know, specialty, mass market, or online, really needs to embed social media platforms as part of their marketing strategy. It shouldn't take, you know, it shouldn't come entirely to the exclusion of mass market, but you know, it clearly has to have a major role. It can't just be a bolt-on. So I want to tell everybody about a cosmetics tracker we have. This is a new service for cosmetics. We've actually implemented it with vitamins and nutrition and sports nutrition. And it's a quarterly survey, very similar to what we see that I just presented with a few changes. First of all, it's broader sample, 2,000 women versus just 1,000. And what we can get is the types like we saw, but we also get a lot of broad information on brand awareness, favorability, purchasing, both in mass market brands as well as specialties. We also can get more granular on what outlets, what websites, what specific banners in the food channel, etc. And then we'll get demographics and key buyer groups. So tell me about Amazon buyers, tell me about millennials. All that data will be available on a quarterly basis. And so the benefit of this is we get that visibility to these brands and these outlets where there aren't consistent and reliable ways to track it. I mean, there's some services that are getting close to it, but it's very model-based. It's not specific consumer insights. It's a lot of, you know, kind of web algorithms and that type of thing on visibility. Here it's actual consumer feedback that has been validated, at least in those things that we can measure know to be true. It's been validated to those more reliable data sources. The cost is $4,000 per quarter, so we're talking $16,000 a year, and it's basically you are involved. You know, first come, first serve. You can be involved as long as you want or as little as you want, but we are limiting the number of manufacturers. This is valuable information to retailers. If you probably survey, you know, various sales managers at the leading retailers, that's probably one of the top 3 questions that retailers ask is, can you give me any information on what's going on in the channels that I can't track? Well, this tracker will do that for you. And it does it on a reliable basis. So if you want to get more information, you can get into tabsanalytics.com/2017-beauty-survey to get more information about the tracker, to make a request to get you know, a demonstration, or to just sign up for the service. I mean, it's not going to kill you to, you know, this is not a budget buster. This is a nice bolt-on that could be even done at an account level for a major Walmart or Target or whatever. So with that, thanks for all again for attending, and I'm going to kick it back to Dustin for questions. Thank you.